We are talking Along Came the Devil 2. This one is directed and written by Jason Davison. So obviously this is a sequel to clearly the first movie, coming out only a year later. And I actually reviewed the first movie. It also stars Bruce Davison reprising his role here. And before I go into the review of this one, one of my critiques of that first film was that it spent far too long trying to set up a sequel and talking about characters that weren't even in the first movie. And little did I know there was a sequel only a year later. So how does the sequel compare? And do you have to watch the first movie? Yes, I would say this is one of those films where you kind of do have to watch the first movie. It is possible to kind of pick up the story threads, but I feel there's so much kind of referred to and characters referred to, even though all the characters in this one are more or less new characters, then it will be confusing if you haven't seen it. And I have seen the first one, and to be honest with you, even now, then I was still kind of thinking, I don't really remember what happened. So anyway, let's just cut to the chase and go through what the plot is. So essentially in the first movie there was clearly a possession. And in this film, we have a kind of a young girl who is essentially the sister of the person who was kind of possessed in the original kind of movie. And she's trying to come back to her kind of hometown and try and kind of find out where she is. And then she kind of moves in with her estranged father, who used to be abusive. And again, he's kind of like a main character in this one, whilst he wasn't in the first one, along with her kind of like half brother and the husband's wife. You've got Bruce Davison here returning as the priest from the first movie, and essentially it follows on where seemingly this kind of family has been kind of cursed by this sort of demon or demons in a possession, and ultimately is once again targeted its family in various kind of forms. So can they escape? Can they survive? What will happen? You have to watch the movie to find out. So first of all, what works with this movie? Now, what I would say with this movie is very similar to what I said about the last one. Because there's only a year apart of these movies, it's clear that these movies were more or less made one after another. And I feel that any kind of critiques that may have been levelled at the first one, because they were kind of filmed back to back, as I'm assuming here, the director hasn't had a chance to do anything with. So a lot of the critiques are the same, but a lot of what works is the same. And one thing I would say that works in both of these films, but especially in the second one, is a strong visual effects style. There is some truly good spooky moments in this movie, effects-wise. You know, they used kind of like some pretty effective jump scares, I've got to say. Now, if you're not a fan of jump scares, this movie's may not going to be the one for you, because there is quite a lot of them, and there's a few fake-out ones as well, which are a little bit annoying. But nonetheless, I think there's some really kind of like pretty decent effects work here, from a couple of headless moments to kind of like possession units, just kind of like rattling on doors where it's really intense and screaming and stuff like that. I think all the kind of like the horror aesthetics here are done very, very well, to good effect, and are quite unsettling, I would say, especially if you are, you know, if you're a fan of kind of possession movies. There are some scenes here that I think are truly spectacular. I've got to say, I thought the acting was fairly strong in this movie. I thought the father, who is this kind of, and he used to be an abusive father, and you know, he's trying to kind of change his ways, giving up the drink and all of this, but he always seems like he's teetering on the knife edge. I thought he did an excellent job here and made a layered character. I thought he did a great performance, and somewhat of a thankless role, to be fair, but his character was multifaceted, and I thought the actor did a great job here, you know, of really kind of portraying that. I think Bruce Davison has a little bit more to do in this movie, and you know, he's always pretty good. Our kind of main female protagonist is pretty good, so the acting was, I would say, pretty good. The directorial style was also fairly strong. Some of the kind of like the framing and camera movements, kind of where we have like panning shots kind of going around the table, look kind of like quite stylish and have a distinct kind of visual style to it. And like I've said, I feel this movie is a little bit more self-contained in regards to, it's not, I mean, it does look like it appears to maybe set up future films, but I don't think it's quite as obsessed with it as the first film was, which was a huge detriment to that first film, because it's been so long doing that. I feel with this movie, although there's elements like that, it saves it right to the end, so you don't really kind of get that baggage. However, let's move on to the negatives. I would say this movie doesn't do a good job in introducing new viewers who maybe haven't seen the kind of the first movie. Now, if you're like a big franchise movie and you're doing like the next Avengers movie or something like that, you can pretty much guarantee everyone's seen the first one. But a small indie, I feel, needs to, if you're doing a sequel of a of an indie movie that is not like a smash hit, you've got to make it accessible to new viewers. Now, it does that in part because we were introduced to basically the majority of new characters, so we do kind of see it from a fresh point of view. But if you haven't seen the first movie, I do not feel this movie does a good enough job of setting up kind of the status quo and getting you as a new viewer kind of like up to date with maybe what's gone on. And there's a little bit too inside baseball with the first movie. Now, if you're very familiar with the first movie, that's great, and then obviously you're going to appreciate that, and you can go into this one and kind of pick up everything straight away. But for a new viewer, I feel it doesn't particularly do that. Next thing is, when it's all said and done, this movie is more or less just a straight possession movie again. And it being a sequel, it would have been nice to have maybe seen it move away a little bit from the formula. It's all the kind of like, people think they're mad and all of this, and it's the same old thing that you've seen in countless other kind of like possession movies. I've also got to say, I think the movie's a little bit, has a few plot holes here and there. I don't want to kind of go into too big a kind of spoilers here, but there's, it's kind of, well, let's just say who the kind of the possession is targeted at seems to be a little bit inconsistent in regards to, hang on a second, wasn't this guy just kind of dealing with a supernatural entity, and why is he completely okay with it? Why didn't the priest say that this particular person was under attack and they said this one was? There's all this kind of little inconsistencies here that I feel have just been kind of rushed through a little bit. And again, I put this probably down to the fact that at least it seems that these movies were made in quick succession to each other, and I think a few kind of plot holes have kind of like just got a miss here. The going back onto the jump scares, I feel this movie does a couple of like, it was only a dream thing a little bit too often here. It actually does it multiple times through the movie, and I think you can get away with it once. It's a trope which I don't think is particularly popular at any point, but maybe you can do it once. But any more than that, and you're going to start to kind of irritate your audience. And this movie does do it multiple times, which is going to be quite frustrating. But overall, I would say it's a solid, if not spectacular, possession movie. I think it actually is better than the original film. I would have liked to have seen this a little bit more kind of self-contained and maybe a little bit more kind of like originality of the script, especially if it had such a similar story to the kind of the first movie. It almost seems a lot like a rehash rather than a new story. But it is worth a watch if you'd like, fairly kind of well made and proficiently kind of like shot possession films. I feel the production value here looks strong for a kind of a low budget indie, and there are some kind of strong directorial choices here, and I feel the effects work is actually a lot better than the first one, and that wasn't bad. So I want to give this one a 6 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.